Good morning and welcome. My name is tlewis and I serve as the Director of Membership and Engagement here at Unity Temple Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are delighted that you are joining us this morning and hope that you will be with us again. If you are new to our community, we would love to get to know you and keep you informed about the many ways you can participate. Visit our website at unitytemple.org and fill out a visitor form, or stop by the Newcomer Welcome every Sunday from 9:30 to 10 via Zoom. You may contact me at tlewis@unitytemple.org for more information about how to attend. I look forward to meeting you and seeing you at coffee hour.
Good morning. My name is Terry Powell, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees at Unity Temple. It is my pleasure to welcome you here. Following the service, we invite you to join us for our Zoom coffee hour. You'll find the link in the email you received. Our congregation's core values are compassion, transformation, justice, and acceptance. Our mission is to embody these values by welcoming all, inspiring compassion, nurturing wonder, and serving community. Last Tuesday, you received a message about the work of the Community Transformation Team, that it is in the best interests of our community not to open Unity Temple for services this fall. A survey is being sent to everyone to get your perspective on how to go forward and any questions and concerns you may have. Please respond promptly so that we can move to the next phase of planning with the input of everyone. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
I invite you to light your chalice along with us. We are the Unitarian Universalists. We are the church of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We take care of planet Earth and each other.
Breathe deeply, center down, bring all of who you are. It's so good to gather together, and this morning Reverend Joseph Santos Lyons joins us today from Antipolo City in the Philippines. He has an international following for his work with multiculturalism, anti-racism, and his organizing of religious liberals in Asia. We gather this morning to foster courage and compassion. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your life journey, you are welcome here. May we open our hearts, our minds, our souls as we gather for worship on this glorious day.
Please join us with the words of our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity and fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with divine. Thus to be covenant with each other and with God.
Stand by me while I run this Hi, friends. I have a book today called The Day You Begin. It's from Jacqueline Woodson, and it's illustrated by Rafael Lopez. There will be times when you walk into a room and no one there is quite like you. Maybe it will be your skin, your clothes, or the curl of your hair. There will be times when no one understands the way the words curl from your mouth, the beautiful language of the country you left behind. My name is Rigoberto. We just moved here from Venezuela. And because they don't understand, the classroom will fill with laughter until the teacher quiets everyone. Rigoberto from Venezuela, your teacher says, so soft and beautifully that your name and homeland sound like flowers blooming, the first bright notes of a song. There will be times when the words don't come. Your own voice, once huge, now smaller, when the teacher asks, "What did you do last summer? Tell the class your story." We went to France, Chela says. These shells come from a beach in Maine. A boy named Jonathan holds out a jar filled with tiny shells so fragile, they look like they'll turn to dust in your own untraveled hands. My whole family went to India, Spain, South Carolina, each souvenir a small triumph of a journey, their travels going on and on. And as you stand in front of that room, you can only remember how the heat waved as it lifted off the curb, and your days spent at home caring for your little sister who made you laugh out loud and hugged you hard at nap time. You can only remember the books you kept on reading long after she had fallen to sleep. And in that room, where no one else is quite like you, you look down at your own empty hands and wonder, what good is this when other students were flying and smiling and going somewhere? There will be times when the lunch your mother packed for you is too strange or too unfamiliar for others to love as you do. When even your own friend Nadia will wrinkle her nose and say, "What's in there anyway?" And you'll wonder how she doesn't see the rice beneath the meat and the kimchi. You'll wonder why she doesn't remember that rice is the most popular food in the world. There will be times when the climbing bars are too high, the sun is too fat, the run is too fast and far, the game isn't one you can ever really play. I don't want him on our team. You can watch. Maybe you can have a turn later. There will be times when the world feels like a place that you're standing all the way outside of. And all that stands beside you is your own brave self, steady as steel and ready, even though you don't yet know what you are ready for. There will be times when you walk into a room and no one there is quite like you until the day you begin to share your stories. My name is Angelina, and I spent my whole summer with my little sister, you tell the class, your voice stronger than it was a minute ago, reading books and telling stories, and even though we were right on our block, it was like we got to go everywhere. Your name is like my sister's, Rigoberto says. Her name is Angelina, too. And all at once, in the room where no one else is quite like you, the world opens itself up a little wider to make some space for you. This is the day you begin to find the places inside your laughter and your lunches, your books, your travel, and your stories, where every new friend has something a little like you and something else so fabulously not quite like you at all. The end.
Each week, we hold a space for holding each other in our hearts and for the prayers of the people. Who are you holding in your heart at this time? What prayers are on your heart? You may share them in the live chat if you wish. Patrick, the son of Deb Klaus, is home after several weeks in the hospital. His parents are very grateful to be at this stage of his recovery, though there is still a long journey to go. Dawn Owens is holding Dee Dukes in her heart. Dee's mother is in the hospital with COVID, and her sister Deborah was diagnosed with cancer. Dan Andrews shares that his friend John Crowell passed away the night of August 4th after a long battle with cancer. Please keep John's wife, Megan Williamson, and his son, Gavin Crowell, in your thoughts and prayers. Dan also shares that his lifelong friend, Nick Trumulus, musician, activist, father, grandfather, is suffering from COVID and has recently been in and out of the hospital. Russell Harris, the nephew of Denise Sieber, took his own life last week after several years of struggle with depression and drug use. Please keep their family in your thoughts and prayers. Locally, the following people were reported killed during the days between July 31st and August 6th. David Abdulkaram, 31. Alan Britton, 38. Aaron Brown, 26. Juan Cervantes Sierra, 44. Quincy Ferguson, 28. Sierra Ford, 29. Darnisha McCain, 21. Dante Morris, 33. Caleb Reed, 17. Janari Ricks, 9. Darren Sims, 28. Nautica Thompson, 23. Carlton Weekly, 26. DeMarcus Wiggins, 23. May we keep their families and others touched by violence in our prayers. May we also pray for the perpetrators and the impact the violence will have on their lives as well. 75 years ago this past Thursday, a 15-kiloton atomic bomb, the first used in combat, was dropped from an American B-29 onto the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a 21-kiloton atomic bomb devastated Nagasaki. Tens of thousands died immediately. Many more succumbed to the after effects of radiation. May the horrors the survivors endured be retold by a new generation in the hope that no one will suffer a similar fate. If you are going through a challenging time and wish to talk with a pastoral associate, please let us know at pastoralassociates@unitytemple.org.
Will you pray with me? Dear God, who we know by many names, who we know throughout many cultures, who we recognize by many signs. Whatever our language, whatever our color, whatever our place, help us to find our way as one people. One people with the power to choose connection and the power to reject division. Bless us with your affirmation of our unique gifts and our distinct legacies together. Humble us that we may remember our shared humanity. Hold us up when we feel beat down. Give us sustenance when we are hungry. Reveal our connections through words and deeds so that we may overcome isolation and be a beloved community. God, whom I name infinite love, grant us your grace when we fail, that we may have the courage to get up again and again and find a new way. God, whom I call Spirit of life, be that bond between each and every one of us, that we may draw on the wisdom of our world and that by our actions make a better place. Amen, and blessed be.
Hello, my name is Sun Ha Tan. When I started coming to Unity Temple in fall 2003, I found a religion that I didn't even know I was looking for. I also found a faith community that I very much needed. It turned out that so much of Unitarian Universalism and so many parts of Unity Temple felt like home, aligned to who I was, my beliefs, and my hopes. Embracing it all opened up the possibilities that have led to who and where I am today. Growing up until the age of 18 in a small town in Malaysia, a Muslim and multiracial country, I was surrounded by religion. 5 times a day, a nearby mosque broadcasted calls to prayers. In high school, friends, and later my sisters, were converting to Christianity. Our family doctor and friend was a Hindu, and we regularly attended ceremonies at his temple, which always ended with a vegetarian meal. At home, my mother had a little shrine to the kitchen god, and every evening, incense smell from burning joss sticks wafted through the house. My parents were a little bit Confucianist, a little bit Taoist, with a bit of Buddhism thrown in. That was not unusual in many traditional overseas Chinese homes. But what drew me then, and still does, was nature. The river that flowed by our house to the nearby South China Sea with its daily tides, the sea in all its moods, the stars above my rural community that seemed endless. I was also curious about the world, about people and their stories, and how they connected us all. I found many of those in books. Growing up that way, I felt free, even compelled to seek my own spiritual path. That spiritual journey led me to Unity Temple, at a time when my heart was ready to break open. I was a stay-at-home mother of 3 young children, fairly new to Illinois, and half a world away from my family, with other family and friends scattered around the country. Here, so many lovely and loving people welcomed me and my family. As I got to know them, you know who you are. Their stories amazed and inspired me with their truths, passion for causes, and faith to the UU principles. They, and the Sunday services to which we returned over and over, inspired me to say yes to this congregation. Yes to Friday night potlucks, driving in from Elmhurst. Yes to becoming a member, and to joining a Chalice Circle, the precursor of Soul Connections, to which I still belong. Yes to the Women's Connection and to planning life-changing women's retreats. Yes to the family retreats, then held at Williams Bay in Wisconsin, where unforgettable moonlit night, a group of us hiked to the UTUUC observatory next door to look through its historic telescope. From teaching RE to planning programs, to riding the bus to Springfield to meet with legislators to talk about sealing the records of formerly incarcerated people, to working with a Rohingya family that had spent years as refugees in Malaysia, to co-leading the Unity Temple People of Color group. These responsibilities, challenges, and experiences taught me and helped me to grow so much. They have filled me with awe, made me more compassionate, allowed me to build relationships, and helped me to be giving. Here at Unity Temple is where my children gained their extended family. It is where my child circle showed me unconditional love, and where a group of women sharing dreams saved me over and over again. Here is where my longings are understood and my questions are heard and supported, even if there are no answers yet. This is the story of how a shy and lonely girl growing up on the other side of the world with dreams of making the world a better place came to find her voice and ways to tell her own story. Unity Temple made it possible, and for that I am and always will be grateful. Thank you for listening.
The first reading is from the Mark Morrison Reed, excerpted from Black Pioneers in a White Denomination. The problem of segregation in all churches seems more unfortunate when one recognizes that there is much to gain beyond the realization of liberal values in a racially diverse congregation. Here, there is a potential for the kind of growth-inducing dislocation that comes from an experience that challenges the unawareness of race, an insensitivity that has made whiteness the norm. In a church with a Black presence, white people may experience a new self-awareness, an awareness of what it means to be white in our culture. This new self-awareness is essential, for people can only affirm others after they have truly affirmed themselves. The richness of our civilization will emerge from a recognition of and respect for difference, not out of ignorance, well-intentioned or otherwise. Our second reading is by the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, delivered at the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. Drawing on our inherited theological tradition to more fully engage the power of we allows us to be intentional about the ways that we move through the world as a faith community. If we are to affirm the power of we as central to our faith, we need to be committed to the work of collective salvation. That language, collective salvation and the power of we, encourages us to move out of our comfort zones, a comfort that some feel entitled to, but that has caused far too much harm in our community. The idea that we are saved together means we invest in communal accountability and shared work for justice as the very things that give our lives value, even in the face of all that seeks to drive us apart. We choose instead, by our living, to bear witness to another way, a way that moves us out of toxic individualism and into the community of communities. Hi, my name is Joseph Santos Lyons, and I'm honored to worship with you today. This service is my chance to reciprocate with my colleague, your Reverend Alan Taylor, who I invited nearly 20 years ago to speak at a UU Young Adult Ministry Conference in the Pacific Northwest. It's good to be with each and every one of you. I'm grateful for the new relationships I've been able to build with several members of your congregation who are forging a vital ministry with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There are dozens of these small group ministries forming within our congregations, and part of my role with Drum is to build a robust network and provide resources for them. These groups are surfacing deeper levels of interdependence and moving our faith towards new ways of worship, fellowship, and social justice. They represent cultures from around the world, the global majority that is underrepresented in Unitarian Universalism. They're an inspiration for my sermon today. They're an inspiration for an idea. The idea starts with shifting Unitarian Universalism to be in a more authentic relationship with Black and Brown communities, and first and foremost within our congregations. How can we keep moving out of our comfort zones to be open to the blessings of cross-cultural relationships and positioning ourselves physically and spiritually to be genuine witnesses to the celebrations and struggles of Black, Indigenous, and people of color? How do we divine gifts from the labors of our ancestors whose shoulders we stand on? We can begin by educating ourselves on our legacy. My journey of educating myself has been difficult. I feel flashes of anger and shame at not knowing, and I'm humbled by my own stumbles. I'm continuously working on my own self-awareness. I see it as one of my spiritual practices to consider new attitudes that move me towards wholeness and reconsider divisive ones. This is always a raw experience that my faith upbringing didn't adequately prepare me for. I grew up in a lay-led humanist fellowship that was the center of my religious world. We were a vibrant congregation with 300 adults and children. These were the only UUs I knew who gathered from the conservative towns south of Portland, Oregon. I didn't know any other UUs in my school or through music or sports, and this made every Sunday special for me. I had what you might consider a classical UU religious education. Study the principles, learning from other religions, developing my code of ethics, and of course, sex ed. I felt enriched but isolated. Looking back, I realize now that I had few opportunities to imagine our UU faith beyond our white middle-class enclave. While I developed confidence and a framework for understanding social matters around the world, there was a gap in our UU community. When the conversation turned to other local congregations, there were strong reactions. There were negative opinions about the big downtown church, how they had a minister, how they said God and took all the credit. There was also gossip about the other church nearby, how it had formed from a split in our church and was deemed competition. I internalized an attitude of superiority, a real contradiction to the sense of mutuality I felt in other areas of my UU life. I conformed to the belief that we were exceptional and that there was no place else like WOOF, our friendly acronym for the West Hills Unitarian Fellowship. A seed of division was planted based on the faulty logic that being UU was ultimately so individualistic that there was little value in cultivating meaningful relationships with other UUs. There were traces of these problematic ideals of exceptionalism and individualism exemplified in how we have related with Black and brown folks in our midst that erect a wall to protect our perceived supremacy when what we need is a bridge. Starting here in the US, where we have had the strongest and best resourced branch of our tree of faith, we have let numerous ministries of people of color struggle and even rot on the vine. We have historically undercommitted when progressive-minded Black and brown clergy have sought support for ministries in their communities, and stumbled in our more recent grand gestures that have fallen short in our desire for instant gratification. I'd like to share several stories with you about some of our ancestors. Let us go back 100 years. In Jamaica, a young Ethelred Brown struggled with the concept of the Trinity. He felt drawn to the notion of the unity of God and was unable to reconcile the idea of the Trinity with what he had read in the Bible. The legend goes that one afternoon at his uncle's house, he found a booklet on the table with the words, "The Lord our God is one God." The author was the Reverend William Ellery Channing, one of our most well-known American ministers. After reading Channing and learning more about Unitarianism, Ethelred decided he too was a Unitarian, but there were no Unitarian churches in Jamaica. When Ethelred was 32 years old, he decided to become a Unitarian minister. He didn't know any other Unitarians, so he wrote an open letter to any Unitarian minister in New York City. Eventually, he got a message back inviting him to Meadville Seminary in Pennsylvania. There, he completed his studies and was ordained in 1912 as the first Black person to become a Unitarian minister. He founded a church in Jamaica that lasted a short while, and then moved to New York, where he started the Harlem Community Church in 1920 that lasted until 1955. The congregation was isolated and never fully accepted into our association, ultimately lacking the resources to continue when Reverend Brown retired. Around the same time in Cincinnati, The Reverend W.H.G. Carter trained in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, yet shifted away over his questioning of the divinity of Jesus. He founded the Church of the Unitarian Brotherhood in 1918 in the West End, alongside a fraternal order called the Grand Order of Denizens that was dedicated to providing food, money, clothing, and advocacy to poor Blacks. Other Unitarians knew about the church and its founder, but turned their backs because the church was Black and poor. 20 years later, a representative of the American Unitarian Association came to investigate in response to years of requests for support. But the conclusion of the official report was, "I do not recommend Unitarian fellowship for Mr. Carter or subsidy for his movement." In other words, there was no ministerial recognition for the now elderly Reverend Carter, nor moral support or financial resources to help continue the ministry into the next generation. By the 1940s, the Church of the Unitarian Brotherhood closed down. In 1998, this story was unearthed in a sermon delivered by the Reverend Sharon Dittmer at our North Hill Fellowship in Cincinnati. Afterward, speaking to a hushed congregation, Mr. Leslie Edwards, a member of that fellowship's board, stood up and said, "That's my grandfather you were talking about, and I never thought I'd hear his name mentioned in a Unitarian church." In these earliest stories of Black ministries, we see a deep integration of religion and racial justice. Reverend Carter ran for the Cincinnati City Council as a Republican 4 times during a period when Republicans were the visible leaders on civil rights, albeit unsuccessfully. Reverend Brown worked with the Jamaican trade union movement for living wages and advocated for the rights of immigrants. He had his own experience of being deported from the US for being undocumented. In so many ways, they exemplify our modern UU values of prophetic ministry and serving communities most affected by injustice. It is a loss that they were kept at arm's distance, disregarded, and even denigrated. Imagine the possibilities of the power of we that calls us to deepen our interdependence and reminds us of our ability to heal and serve humanity. Imagine the opportunities that could have flourished. Let us shift into the 1970s, where our expansive and regal First UU Church in Los Angeles is situated between a growing Korean immigrant and Salvadoran refugee communities. First Church opened its doors to the Zelada family, who were fleeing political persecution from the US-backed government of El Salvador. The Zeladas were possibly the first undocumented immigrants taken into the sanctuary in the history of our church. They would become steadfast lay leaders who formed the core of the Spanish language ministry embedded in First Church, called the Oscar Romero Fellowship. At the same time, members of the congregation were increasingly in contact with Korean immigrants, many of whom were also fleeing a US military-backed dictatorship. A chance encounter with a local Korean newspaper editor evolved into a Korean language ministry that ordained and called the Reverend Shun Kim, one of the earliest Asian American ministers who served as associate minister of the church. Throughout the 1980s, the predominantly white congregation cultivated these 2 culturally specific ministries that peaked with paid ministry and a weekly Sunday worship that was multilingual with live, simultaneous interpretation and headphones in every pew. The backdrop in the UUA at the time was something akin to see no evil, hear no evil when it came to racism. Still stinging from the aftermath of the backlash by white UUs to Black UU empowerment in the 1960s, the UUA was largely silent on matters of race. Efforts for racial healing, multicultural ministry, and racial justice used coded language, such as urban ministry, to stay connected and stay alive. It would not be until 1997, when Drum was founded, would people of color ministry become visible again at the national level in our faith. As I reflect on these developments and challenges, especially as a biracial Asian American, I lament our hidden histories and missed opportunities. I also can better understand why we lack a profound sense of interdependence within our American congregations and around the world. In my own yearning to be grounded and feel a greater sense of wholeness during my ministerial formation, I sought to build a broader interdependence with Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our church. This started with Drum and led to connecting internationally, specifically in Asia. As I became immersed in different cultural contexts, I began to practice the new ways of being that are described by the Reverend Sophia Betancourt in our reading of moving out of individualism and toward a community of communities. As a young seminarian, I made friends with a fifth-generation Unitarian from the Khazi Hills in Northeast India. Questions welled up inside me as we got to know one another. I reflected on our first source, the UU source that says we draw on the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and openness to the forces that create and uphold life. What does this mean within the geography of our faith? How do I stay in relationship with these different cultural contexts where our faith is embodied? My friend Darihun Kriyam invited me to visit the Khazi Hills. She's the first woman to become a minister in her faith community, the Unitarians of Khazi Hills. And I arranged for a semester of independent study. I lived in the village of Smit, outside Shillong City. One day, we scheduled a visit to meet Darihun's grandmother. We took a local bus along dirt roads as far as it would go into the foothills, and then disembarked and walked an hour across green valleys to reach her thatched hut home. As I sat on a mat on the dirt floor, I let myself relax in these more unfamiliar surroundings. Taking in the sounds of a granddaughter talking to her grandmother, and the smell of cooking and smoke filling the modest abode as we shared tea and chewed betel nut with lime. I learned that her family became Unitarian 5 generations ago during the time of Hajor Kisor Singh. Hajor Kisor Singh was a layperson whose liberal religious inspiration coincided with the growing presence of Protestant missionaries in the late 1800s and a personal reading of the Bible. With evangelical Christians undermining and threatening Khazi culture, including their matrilineal social structure, where, among other aspects, girls inherit the family wealth and children take the surname of their mother. Hajor Kisor Singh forged a Unitarianism that meshed with aspects of their ancient Khazi religion. Khazis hold traditional beliefs in one God, who they call Uble, who is omnipotent and omnipresent, and viewed religion as inseparable from all that happens, but are organized without churches, holy books, or ministers. With a passion reminiscent of our American church planners of the 20th century, Hajor Kisor Singh laid the foundation for a thriving indigenous Unitarian movement with 45 congregations that number nearly 10,000 members today. These experiences grounded me for a text I received late one night from a minister a couple years ago. She asked if I could talk about an urgent and confidential matter. It gave me goosebumps, and I wondered, am I in trouble? I replied back, and a few minutes later, we were on the phone. And my colleague said, we are trying to help a father and his 2 daughters escape Burundi in Central Africa. He's a lawyer who has been defending our church in Bujumbura from charges related to their work on behalf of LGBTQ persons. The church was raided recently by paramilitary forces, and several members have been arrested. The rest have gone into hiding. I listened to more of the details. I took a deep breath, releasing some tension, and then said the 4 words that are a mantra in our faith. What can I do? Even when part of me wanted to question and analyze every potential angle, my faith gave me courage and clarity to say yes to hosting the family. He was a single parent, his wife having died tragically of a health condition a few years earlier. They arrived with trauma and the clearness that comes from fleeing danger and seeking safety. I risked a little to offer an endorsement letter for their travel visa. I sacrificed a little of my time and treasure and asked a few others to do the same. I had a lot of questions, many of which I decided to let go of and not add my own curiosity and confusion to the family's burdens. I held counsel with my trusted friends when I had anxieties, which allowed me to be more present and affirming during what I could only imagine was a profound, life-changing transition. I learned little details each step of the way about the hardships and the hopes of someone in their situation. I listened to how their Unitarian church had been a haven for many on the margins, how speaking out for human rights brought so much danger and dispossession that they made the decision to uproot and leave their homeland. I was a witness to their story and how their values informed how they lived in the world. Today, my ministry is based in the Philippines, where there are approximately 2,500 Unitarian Universalists. Their origin story begins with the ministry of the Reverend Toribio Quimada in the 1950s. With 26 congregations centered in some of the economically poorest communities in the archipelago nation, Filipino UUs are primarily farm workers, sugarcane in the rural areas, and day laborers in the urban areas. The Reverend Quimada was forced into Christianity by missionaries and found his Universalist faith from his personal reading of the Bible. It was only later that, in contact with the Universalist church in Massachusetts, did he realize that there was a broader organized movement. The congregations here operate on a few hundred US each year, drawn from weekly offerings where workers drop $1 each Sunday. Ordained clergy are called from the pews, historically with minimal training, and serve voluntarily and without salary. Like the Harlem and Cincinnati congregations, their ministers work by day to provide for their livelihoods, and their ministries include significant mutual aid programs to bridge the poverty and disparities in their communities. Around the world, there are other historical and emerging BIPOC UU ministries. There have been organic movements that have developed in some similar ways. They had contact with Protestant missionaries who were backed by colonial powers. They were exposed to the Bible with the ability for self-study and came to their own conclusions regarding liberal religion, but without Western UU persuasion. They rejected the more dogmatic and exclusionary practices of Christianity and were branded heretics, and preached a message of oneness and universal salvation centered on the example of Jesus. Also notable, especially in Asia, is how closely connected UUs have remained to indigenous faith practices. In the Khasi Hills, they maintained a close interconnection with local indigenous practices and histories. And for example, here in the Philippines, the church was incorporated with a UU Faith Healers Association as a central part of the foundation. There is a much broader world of Unitarian Universalism than I ever imagined in our Sunday school. Moving back and looking at these stories in vastly different contexts, you can see common yearnings for an inclusive faith and the desire for a spiritual community grounded in religious freedom and liberation. Woven into these stories are proof of the power of Unitarian Universalism in cultures and languages beyond our American UU demographics, that is 98% white, highly educated, and middle class. I urge us to be clear about these demographics, to name the status quo and understand the dynamics, because this prepares us to be intentional about the shifts we want to make. prepares us for the emotional and spiritual labor needed to foster more authentic relationships with people beyond the dominant and historic demographic. These stories can provide us examples and inspiration, as well as being cautionary tales. There are natural entry points you can choose to live more fully our values of interdependence. What are the stories in your own congregation? What about the UU congregations in your area? Who are the BIPOC people who have been active, and what communities do they come from? A broader interdependence is needed now more than ever. The suffering of our world, the divisions in our human family, the crises of climate, income inequality, and the pandemic are global in nature and require thinking and acting globally. We can only survive alone for so long. We should be at the forefront of cultivating new attitudes, starting, as the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed noted, with a deeper understanding of ourselves, to continuously forge new bonds that learn from our legacy and imagine a better future. As your own congregation endorses and invests in a people of color ministry, may you find new ways of living faithfully through a broader interdependence. May it be so, and amen.
Our offering this week goes to Green Community Connections, a community-based organization founded in the Oak Park and River Forest area that works collaboratively to build a resilient, environmentally sustainable community locally. You can donate at greencommunityconnections.org, send a check to Unity Temple, or follow the directions on the QR code. May what you give bring you joy.
As we go forth, may we say in our hearts, one way we will seek a broader interdependence. May we breathe in the commitment to gain new self-awareness, and may we breathe out our self-doubt. Each of us is loved. Each of us is interconnected. May you carry this blessing each and every day. Amen.